Hi, everybody. Welcome to Mormonish. I'm Rebecca.
And I'm Ganesh.
Listen to how well you did that. Oh my gosh. Don't let Landon hear that because it sounded so professional and good. No, poor Landon. He's off on a work call. So, of course, I've enlisted one of our very favorite guests, Ganesh. How are you this afternoon?
I'm great. I could never replace Landon. He is just so spectacular, but I'm excited that I get to at least stand in for him in some way for a little bit. So
That's
that's
right.
good.
That's exactly right. And I have to laugh because every time we podcast together, because of the time difference, New Zealand and Utah, I always schedule earlier in the day. And at that point in the day is where the sun is coming right in my window. So I'm just going to say, Ganesh, you light me up. Shall we say that?
That's quite a compliment, and I hope to
It
live
is
up to it.
That's exactly right. So this is kind of an informal little, just a chit chat sort of, because it's so informal that I don't even have my Mormonish mug today. I have my favorite beverage of choice, which is a McDonald's iced coffee with sugar-free vanilla. This is
Oh,
how casual and behind the scenes I'm being. Do you have a beverage, Ganesh?
I've got a glass of water just in
A
case
glass.
my voice gets hoarse, and just so that I can sip
That's
as I listen to your melodious voice.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly right. So, and I was just saying to Ganesh before we started recording, he has been in Utah, in the US for like a couple of months, and we had a chance to interact over and over again, month after month. And so it just seems kind of weird to me that now you actually are very far away. Seems strange.
Back in New Zealand. But the crazy thing, of course, is that I'm in the southern hemisphere, and we've just gone on daylight savings, and of course Utah will come off daylight savings, which
Yes.
actually brings our time difference closer together. So it has been 6 hours difference, and it will shrink to 4 hours difference, even though we haven't changed our location. So that's just the weird thing that happens around the world when you know the ways that the sun works.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's all
No,
crazy stuff to me.
daylight saving times is nuts. And I may have talked about this before, but my mom, she was so funny. She refused to acknowledge daylight savings. She goes, I'm taking medication. I am just not going to acknowledge it. So and she wouldn't even acknowledge time zones either. She had her watch set to the time where she lived and no daylight savings. And so we would always have to translate. What time is that for mom? Oh, yeah. Okay. That would be, but yeah, she stuck to it. And it was probably pretty simple for her. The rest of us were very confused, but yeah, she did it. So, oh, there you go.
Yes. Well, your mother sounds like a very unique person who lived life on her own terms. That
On
sounds
the edge.
incredible. Yeah.
I refuse to acknowledge daylight savings. That's about as edgy as she got. So,
Are there
anyway,
other things she are there other things she refused to acknowledge?
oh, yes, yes. And we can't get into those here, maybe on another podcast. But yes, her own terms. That's, in fact, that should have actually been on the headstone, which I just visited a few weeks ago. I should have said on her own terms. Yeah. So, anyway, so what we're going to talk about today, and we've been talking about these things for a week or so, but then kind of everything changed. We were going to talk about our conference predictions, right? Just what they might say, what they should say, what they won't say, all of that. But then I feel like everything kind of changed over the weekend, right? With the two major events. We have President Nelson passing away. And as we were all posting and talking about that, suddenly then the tragedy with the Michigan shooting in the LDS church building there. So to me, some of my conference predictions, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like they might be changing things as we speak behind the scenes, even as far as what's said in talks and even what is happening. So I don't know. Do you have that feeling, Ganesh, that maybe right now they're kind of scrambling to do something different, maybe than even what they had planned?
Yeah, I'm sure that there must be some because this is massive for
Yeah.
people, and it will be, effectively the first weekend after this
Mhm.
tragic event in Michigan, and also, President Nelson has been a mainstay for lots of people for so many years now that even thinking about conference without him
Mhm.
is going to change things, and there'll be, I'm sure there's going to be some kind of idea of, well, at some point we have to move on, but we're not actually kind of over the grieving of a president of the church and his impact. So it's going to be a really, I guess, a tenuous balance to try and honor this this person who has had a major impact on the church, particularly with regard to temples and the name. Those are probably two of President Nelson's biggest legacies. And so those are things that need to be acknowledged. But also, Oakes is going to take over, and there are, two parts of that is, one, he's going to have his own legacy, his own thoughts and feelings, even though he's been kind of steering the ship, I think, for a while. But also, there'll be a lot of people that are apprehensive about Oakes because he has been quite divisive and said things that are kind of quite challenging. And it'll be really interesting to see if he addresses that, whether he doubles down on some of his stance, or whether he softens it because he is now in charge, or because some of these other events mean that you've got to go into some of these dialogues with a lot more grace and kindness, because lots of people are grieving currently for a multiple amount of reasons.
Yeah, no, that's very insightful. I think you're right. It's one thing to be second in command and hammer on things. Then when you're in command, you realize there's a lot of people you're commanding, all different kinds of people. And maybe you do have to be a little more diplomatic. I think a lot of people think that's not going to happen. But I think one of the main differences now about conference that I've seen people posting about and questioning is, so will President Oakes become the prophet at conference? I mean, there are certain things that have to take place. Now, there has been a memorial video put out for President Nelson. That has all happened. The funeral is going to be Tuesday the 7th, the public viewing Monday the 6th. So, the question is, what exactly will President Oakes be at this conference? Just the person about to be the prophet, or prophet in waiting? What do you think his role will be procedurally?
Well, I think he will be in charge. Of course, he is the president of the Quorum of the 12. So he'll still have that title of president, and actually to his maybe even to his advantage a little bit, the fact that he is the president and there are 14 men, but effectively they go back to their seniority in the Quorum of the 12. That gives him a greater little bit of emphasis in terms of his role before a new first presidency is announced. And I don't think they will announce a new first presidency till after Nelson's funeral. So I think we'll just see them talk as from the body of the 12. They may even give some history lessons for the idea that this has happened a few times in the past. Ben Parks did a really lovely kind of analysis of this, and showing that this happened when Joseph Smith died, the 12 took over for a little while, and that happened again once Brigham Young died. So the idea that the 12 have this kind of seniority might be a good time to emphasize that. We've talked, and there's been some speculation, of course, around the proclamation of the family. That's the 30th anniversary of that. And many people have said that this won't necessarily happen till, in terms of canonization, till after Oakes is passed away, because he's one of the living.
Yeah, and that was some of my insider information from some LDS apologists who said they knew that they would not canonize it till everyone who had signed it had passed away. Maybe it just looks kind of like bad form. But yeah, that's one of the things we definitely have been speculating on. But again, the death kind of changes everything, because you're right. Will they call, they would have to call a new apostle and 2 new counselors to the first presidency. If it was all going to happen in just a few days, it's just too rushed. I don't think that's going to happen. But a lot of people have been speculating, who will the new first presidency be? And of course, my guess is maintain Eyring and add Bednar. That's what I believe. You've got to have somebody younger in there, and they're all aligned philosophically. They would never put President Uchtdorf, even though I'm team Uchtdorf, they would never, bring him back up or reinstate him. So I predict it'll be that, but not at conference. What do you think about a new first presidency?
I think that sounds very reasonable. That sounds like the most, practical approach to what's going to happen this weekend. And I think, well, certainly the events of the last few days have meant that they'll try to be compassionate to the idea that actually this is a lot of change in a short period of time. They'll be trying to soften it, I would think, just for people's feelings of concern. And in that regard, actually having the 12 might feel a little bit more safe and comfortable for the membership while we deal with the transition, because of how emotional people are, particularly about Michigan. That would be my take and my prediction. And that would be the more compassionate way to address things. I think that if President Oakes does kind of push or ram things through, that would undermine his leadership. It would make people feel very vulnerable in a really tough space, and hopefully he's got the presence of mind, and those people who are advising have got the presence of mind of there's no rush. We can take time. We know what's going to happen. Let's not make it have to happen today. So that would be the most pragmatic thing to do. Mm-hmm. And generally Oakes is pretty pragmatic. He's legalistic. He wants to go through the processes, and he wants to be seen to be doing the right kinds of things. So I think that he'll be conscious of that, while also anticipating the fact that he is going to be in charge. So how might he want to be portrayed to the people whom he's going to now lead?
Yeah, no, I think we're on exactly the same page. And that's why, like I said, my list here, I have of things to discuss. Oh, what's going to happen at conference? It's completely almost out the window, because I agree with you. It's bad form. And I think they sense that, to just do a bunch of stuff, at this particular moment. I think what you said is correct. They're going to rework some of their talks to talk about succession, stability, how they always love to say, there's no chaos in our church. We know exactly what's happening. There's no confusion. There's no coup. It's not like the original succession crisis, right? Everybody can just rest assured. The 12 are up there. They're guiding you. So I think they'll really focus on that. And then there's that balance of mourning, like you said, the past president, and yet looking forward to the future. So I don't know if they will, I had some jokes written about, how many times they're going to say our beloved prophet and quote President Nelson. Now there's a balance, right? Of course, you have to attribute and remember nostalgia, but then you have to solidify, here's our new beloved prophet, right? And it is President Oakes. So, I'm not sure how they'll balance that, but I hope they have the presence of mind just to realize that people can't have that whiplash, right? Especially with all the other events. Everybody is really preoccupied, and they just need everything to be kind of middle of the road, status quo kind of a thing. So even though a new apostle needs to be called, right? That was another one of my, predictions. Will they do that? Will it be somebody that perhaps represents another part of the world? I don't even know about that now. Do you think there'll be somebody new called at this conference, or are they just going to put all that aside because it's too much change and worry about that later?
I think that they'll wait and do that at the next conference. They will really realign the first presidency soon, like I think in the next few weeks, so that we will have a first presidency. But the vacancy in the Quorum of the 12, I think they'll wait till that is addressed next conference. That would seem to be the most reasonable, and that's kind of what's happened in the past. Even when they've had to do this midstream, right? So they've organized the first presidency, even while conference might have been a month or two ago, and then they've addressed the new apostle at the next conference. One of the things that we've seen, like Peter Bleakley, talked about how this is actually not supposed to be the way it is. That you're not supposed to sustain a new prophet first presidency until the next conference, and that's something that is against the law of common consent, which is codified in our Doctrine and Covenants. But over the last few changes, they've absolutely done that, mid, between conferences, and felt quite confident about doing that, because generally people know who's going to be at least the president, even if they don't know who exactly is going to be the councillors. So that I think they will just continue to do that, even though it's out of line. But certainly for the new apostle, that will be for the next conference to do. They might announce who that person's going to be, but they
you
won't
think
be
so?
sustained.
They might.
Yeah,
Wow. Yeah, because that's a big question. People are throwing around Corbett's name. I mean, could it be something absolutely revolutionary like that? Really interesting.
I don't know that they will say that this weekend, but I think closer to the next conference, they'll be be indicating, so that it's not a shock. So yeah, it'd be lovely to see some diversity in the
Some
12.
diversity, yes.
but also
where the new growth is, right? All the new growth is
yeah.
happening, in Africa. So do you know that they have like odds in Vegas over new apostles and things like that?
Oh wow, that's crazy.
That. I mean, I don't know if it's true, but somebody did tell me that. That's really funny. So here's a question for you. So do you think, now I know they do those pre-recorded messages from the prophet. They've done them at the last couple meetings, conferences, because he can't be there. If they have one, which I'm guessing they probably do it weeks and weeks in advance, do you think they would play that? Would they play a message from the grave? I mean, people are speculating on whether they would play it or not if they had it.
So I have a business that makes headstones, and look, we've had the technology for a long, long time, right? For the person who has died to speak at their own funeral. You could have written a note, right?
Right.
Or, recorded an audio file or done a video. But the reality is, how many funerals have you been to where the dead have spoke? Just next to zero, I would say, was the answer. And that is because when someone is gone, one of the trickinesses about grief, but also getting to the next point, is the idea that often the funeral is for the living to reassert their relationships with people who are still alive, and continue past somebody's passing. And so generally it's not very helpful if the dead speak, like it just doesn't affirm that. So consequently, people just don't do it. And so if they have a recording of President Nelson, which is really, really possible.
Yeah, it is.
That I don't think that they will release it. Not at conference. If we're lucky, they might go and say, look, this is what we recorded earlier, and we're going to share it with you. These were some of his last words. But I think that at conference there will be definitely an idea to swap allegiance from Nelson to Oakes, and it won't be very helpful if Nelson speaks. So and it won't very, very, and so that's again, kind of, they'll be looking really closely about how people are honoring and referencing Nelson, and either asking them to revise or changing the narrative so that it quickly goes to Oakes, so that the membership, transfer their loyalty onto him, rather than feel nostalgic about the fact that Nelson has done so much for them. So yeah, it's a tricky balance, because of course this is so close to conference and we haven't seen this before. But it's going to be really important to President Oakes that he is now seen as the successor, and that people are going to heed his counsel really quickly and move on as quick as possible. So it'll be, so that might bring up the next thing is, will they talk about things like Michigan? And there'll be a huge expectation that he will address that, because it's so raw and it's so fundamental to some of the kind of persecution narratives that we have grown up with, and the ideas of, well, how are Latter-day Saints perceived but also treated by their communities. And I think there'll be, I feel like they will need to address it. because it's so fundamental to how we talk about the church, particularly in a United States setting.
Yeah, that is a good question, because I know there have been other massive things going on in the world that they've never addressed, like COVID. They didn't say one word, right? And some of the other scenarios that had global impact, and they just tend to kind of ride above it, right? They're not myopic, they have this view up here.
Mm.
Also, the fact that they have put out information to stakes and wards that said on your official pages, do not talk about Michigan. Take that down. Do not talk about Michigan until after Tuesday night, which I didn't know what Tuesday night was. At first, when I read that, I was like, why Tuesday? And then I realized, oh, the funeral. And it actually said, only say wonderful things about President Nelson on your ward and stake, Instagram, Facebook, social media. That is what they've said. Now, that's interesting. So if they're encouraging wards and stakes not to address it, maybe they will address it publicly. I know they're starting to put out videos about the miracles of Michigan. So, stories of survival and stories of, things that are miraculous that have happened. So you're right. Those can certainly be something that's, very motivating at conference. But again, it's so soon and so still unfolding. So, I don't know how much they're going to do that. I'm on the fence about that. If they're just going to dive in fully and talk about the miracles of Michigan, or if they're just going to mention, trying times, or if they're even going to go into the persecution narrative. I don't know. It may be too soon for all of that, but we'll be watching to see. So,
well, look, my hope would be that there are some really divisive things happening in the States, and of course, Charlie Kirk has been a massive event, and because it's
connected to Mormonism. Everything is connected. The Mormon moment. Are you kidding? I don't think they can imagine such a Mormon moment.
Yeah, gosh, everything is it seems to be on tenterhooks, a powder keg, and it's related to Mormonism. I think those things, like it'd be nice if we had really strong leadership to calm all of that down and to put it in perspective and made people feel, that they were addressed, but also that they could have a great deal of hope for the future. So, and that's why Oaks is such a controversial space, right?
Yes, because I don't know that he's the guy to do that. I mean, he's very controversial and very divisive, and he tends to target groups within the church that cause really strong feelings and, in some cases, actions. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't know that he's the guy that can do that unless he rises above all of it and sort of changes. But I don't know. People are nervous.
People are nervous, and they'll be waiting to see whether this is something they can, whether he can rise to that leadership, whether that or they need to kind of get their solace from somewhere else. So it is quite a pivotal conference in that regard. I think this is a really important moment for the church and leadership in the church of how they can thread the needle, because there are a lot of very unhappy people. The interactions I've had online, I'm sure that some that you've had too, where people are kind of like, we're up in arms. I need to renew my gun license. I'm going to be packing as I go to church next Sunday. Those kinds of statements, which I've seen from my people on the internet, not necessarily even just the people I don't know. So the idea that this is really made them feel incredibly worried about their membership and their safety in the United States, and then also, who do they ascribe that threat to? Right? Is it to the wider groups of marginalized people in the United States? Is it to particular political parties? Is it to particular denominations of Christianity? Like, who is the worry that they should be concerned about? And of course, if anybody's listening to various commentators across the Mormon spectrum, some people are pointing to one of those three groups all of those groups, couple of those groups, like there's a heightened sense of we are not safe, and Mormonism could be targeted. There's been a couple of Christian pastors who have spoken out about Mormonism in the wake of Charlie Kirk's assassination, that have suggested that the blame for that should be on the Mormon people at some level because they're outside of Christianity. And then there's the idea that Michigan suggests that there are people in the Christian community who don't see Mormons as Christian and could take matters into their own hands if they're incited enough. That's a real concern. The majority of the members of the church in the United States are Republican, so lots of them are pointing to the targets which the president have identified, and that's concerning too. But what if we as Mormons become the targets of rhetoric for this anti-establishment or people that need to be scapegoated by the Christian national propaganda? So these are really big concerns for the church, for members of the church, for parts of the United States that are heavily connected to Mormonism, like Utah, but also some of those other places where you have to connect with your local communities. And if Mormonism is being blamed or scapegoated in some of these aspects, that places like Michigan, where you're tiny in comparison, this can feel incredibly vulnerable, and we've seen that this is dangerous. So the ability for a leader to address these things, calm people's fears, help them to see some form of reason or logic. In that regard, I think Oakes is quite good at doing the logic thing, but he hasn't been incredibly good at doing the emotional, binding thing. So I'm really interested to see.
Yeah, no, it is a pivotal conference. And I had even said to Landon, oh, okay, I'm not going to watch this time. I always try to reclaim my weekend. I'm just going to watch RFM or Nemo's recap, but now I'm like, how do you not watch with all of these questions? You know what I mean? And speaking of not feeling safe and violence, there's a petition to reinstate the Nauvoo Legion. I mean, I know maybe it's, just somebody but there are several hundred signatures on it. And this means, Mormons, we need to protect ourselves. And, the Nauvoo Legion probably caused more problems than it solved, just in, making everybody nervous around them. But that's what happens in this. I don't know. I just call it a Mormon moment, because these two extremely violent acts, the Charlie Kirk and Michigan, that happened back to back, they all seem to, if you listen to one narrative, involve someone who committed violence because of no longer feeling a part of the Mormon community. Do you know what I mean? There's kind of that narrative going on, somebody that's cast out or something, and then, the unthinkable happens. So it is a really, I don't know, it can be really unsettling and frightening. And I know people do tune into conference to try to get some, peace. And that's why I think they may change some of the things they were going to say before and talk about. There's no room for that right now. But I will address another group that's kind of getting blame, and that's those of us that operate in the post-Mormon space, right? Blame for violence, blame for all of that. A lot of people in this podcasting space or influencer space in post-Mormonism have received blame, saying your rhetoric causes, people to feel violent, have violent feelings toward Mormons. So, that's been really interesting to navigate. And I don't know if that's going to dissipate or if that is going to get worse. But I myself, even on several different things that I've put out, have gotten comments. Well, don't you think that you're the problem? Don't you think that, So, I mean, that's interesting how you look around to find a cause for what happened, and you try to look for this evidence. So everybody's unsettled. Faithful Mormons, post-Mormons, it involves all of us. It is a Mormon moment. We are all Mormons. So I guess maybe talking about how different conference may be. One of my predictions was the canonization, of course, of the Family Proclamation. I thought they would probably not do that. I thought that they might talk it up a lot in many different of the addresses because it is the 30th anniversary, the birthday. But now I don't know. Now maybe it's just, do you really want to, unless they go with the narrative, we've got to, be strong in our families, but every time they say that, then they're alienating a lot of other people who are faithful, who, are part of the LGBTQ community or supporters. So I don't know if they're smart enough not to be divisive like that and maybe downplay the proclamation when they were going to, make it front and center. What do you think is the role of the proclamation, or talks about the proclamation or mention of it at this conference?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's 50-50.
Yeah.
And that is the question of the moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you double down, or do you try and dissipate some of the concerns and the division that's in there?
Yeah.
So I hope for, especially, and we're in this wider context. So there's this Mormon context and this Mormon moment, but it's also in part of a wider United States conflict, divisiveness, but also our world divisiveness, right? So who is the other? And, how can we, it's going to be the question, how do we protect ourselves from the other, the threat, or how do we build bridges so that there is no other, and we are embracing people who may not feel the same way as us, or may not turn up in the same way as us. And I think that, gosh, that requires considerable leadership. It requires a cool head, a person with a bit of time and investment in the future. And
younger. I think maybe that requires a younger person, or a younger, general authority or younger apostle who's actually out there meeting people, talking to people, finger on the pulse of what's actually happening, not a much older person who's in an ivory tower, who is awesome to just read proclamations and other people here and there, but you're not seeing the reality of it. So that's why I just wonder if it'll just be business as usual, and they won't consider any of this unless they're being advised, perhaps maybe by Aaron Sherinian, right? Somebody who understands the lay of the land and the politics. I mean, President Oaks did put out a statement from himself, signed President Oaks, him alone, about Michigan, asking for peace and all of that. Everybody said, oh, it's obvious that Aaron Sherinian wrote this, maybe. But, so he's definitely trying to show some leadership. It was from him. It was not from the first presidency. It was not from the apostles. It was from President Dallin H. Oaks. So, he's definitely trying to do something like that. But I just don't know if they're capable at the top of really understanding the damage that even some of the things they say can do, to people and families, and all the pain and hurt out there. So conference is really difficult for a lot of people. It really is. I remember when I was faithful so long ago, years ago, and, like in my family, they wanted to watch it. And I would say, I'm married, my kids are teenagers, and some of them wanted to watch. And I said, you guys have to listen, just earphones, because I just can't, there was just I couldn't even listen. There was just something about it. Just everything I heard just kind of broke my heart in a lot of ways, and I just had such a hard time understanding how people found it inspiring, and maybe I was cherry picking the things, but it wasn't even like, oh, aha. I was just kind of heartbroken listening to it in a lot of ways from the perspective of other people, and what they were saying. So I don't know, conferences, RFM, don't you worry about him doing that wrap up that he does? Oh my gosh. He said, he starts his wrap up after each session when the closing song is playing. So if you guys have not checked that out before, and Nemo does a wonderful wrap up too. RFM does it alone, just kind of reading his notes. He once posted a picture of his desk. I mean, it is covered with notebooks and books. He does an incredible job. I think he may drop dead someday doing that because it's so intensive. And Nemo does an excellent job too. So, it's important to kind of know what's going on. If you can't bring yourself to watch, make sure you check out one of those summaries. But I don't know, Do you have a mixed relationship with conference, even when you were a bishop, or were you always just one of those ones that was on board? It was amazing.
Fortunately for me, because New Zealand is a day ahead, which means
Oh,
that we, effectively the Sunday so we have church on conference. So we get maybe the end of the Saturday sessions on our Sunday, and
interesting.
so we're able to kind of slightly distance ourselves from
Hmm.
the immediate effect. And what that generally means is that then people go and listen to the talks during the week, and then they don't even turn up to church the following week
Yeah,
to watch the conference because they've already listened to
because
it
I
in their
already know.
cars,
Yeah.
they're driving. And so that has allowed me and others to be slightly distanced from the immediacy of it.
Yeah.
And we've already invested in our local community and congregation ward, um, in a different way, because they won't play the conference sessions till the following week. So I've been able to, I guess, distance myself from the immediate impact for a long, long time, and so I generally nowadays I just do the wrap ups as well, because I just want to know what's going on, and I want to know what talks are worth listening
Yeah.
to, rather than having to think that this is happening right now in my immediate space. So it's
Yeah.
that's
I
that.
like that.
So
I
I've,
like that.
yeah,
At a
and
10
maybe
foot
that
pole.
and maybe that's worth doing for people too, to go, okay, look, I'm going to listen to it post rather than
Yes.
feeling its immediacy, so
Yes.
that I can be more kind of controlled in my emotive response.
Yep. Kind of
I was going
removed.
to say around about the challenge of our geriocracy in the church. I was with Greg Prince a couple of weeks ago, and he's very funny, but he says, Ganesh, ask me what I think I would change if I could change anything in the
Oh,
church. I said, Greg, what would you change? And he goes, I'm glad you asked me that question. And then he would go off. But one of his big things is, of course, the fact that there is no age out
yes.
for the apostles is a really big disadvantage for the church. The fact that they were able to put one in for the 70 and allow them to effectively retire and become emeritus and go enjoy their families and have this space, allows for a new generation to come up with current buy-in to what is happening in the world.
Living
But
in the real world. Can we say
living in
that?
the real
That's
world, yeah.
exactly it. No, I know. And I went to a lecture from Matt Harris about his new book on B.H. Roberts, right? And he
Yeah.
explained this. B.H. is like, hey, we got to have an age out. We got to have them retire at 70. We have to, all of us. He wanted that to be for all of us. And the first presidency
Yeah.
and apostles said, oh, it's a great idea for them
For them,
underneath
yes.
us, but not for us. So this has been something that people have seen this. It's been so obvious. It's the elephant in the room, where the prophet is infirm, the counselors are running it, then the counselors become the prophet, they're infirm, their counselors are running it. It's a huge power vacuum, and it's not the way to run something. And I always make the joke, okay, you believe that God is keeping the prophet alive, right? For some purpose. The only way the new prophet comes in is the old prophet passes away. Well, then shouldn't all of them abstain from any medical care, which they have the top in the world, right? If it really is God led, no medical care. God keeps you alive or nothing. I mean, that would be the honest way to do it, right?
Well, and lots of people felt like Nelson could go on forever. I mean,
Oh,
101 is an amazing innings.
it's
You've got to
incredible.
be
Yep.
really impressed by that.
Yep.
But there's a point at which you go, this can't continue. This is
Yeah.
just not sustainable.
No.
And at the same time, there's going to be it. It almost becomes the expectation. So it's kind of a really
Yeah.
weird scenario that we're in, particularly as technology, health benefits,
Yeah.
are able to put us a bit further ahead in this space, and maybe even advances in medicine as go forward. This situation could get worse and worse, because 101. Gosh, he's the oldest living apostle ever. But he's going to be succeeded by somebody, further. Like
Oaks is already considered a spring chicken right now. They're like, he's only 94 or 3, whatever he is, you know what I mean? He's already seen as much younger. That is not true, and you have to ask yourself, you hear the inspiring stories of President Nelson waking up in the middle of the night with a lighted pen and a notepad and going, Wendy, it's happening. God is talking to me. Get out of the bedroom. I need to write everything down, right? Now, if your grandpa, who is 95 years old or 98 or 101, came to you and said that, all of us would say, okay, Grandpa, yeah, I think you probably just need to get some sleep. Let me just get you a heating pad. I mean, you would never, whatever Grandpa came out of that bedroom on that pad with, you would never live your life based on it, but it's such a different perspective when they're up at the top. But you're right, as far as, these the gerontocracy, they're the silent generation. You have to realize that they're the silent generation. You need people that are interacting with people in the world, the concerns, the problems. Of course, what overweighs all that is inspiration, right? And revelation. Faithful believe that they are, the lighted pen is real. So we're looking at it from a very different perspective, of course. But, there's going to be that balance, I think, at conference with, saying goodbye to President Nelson, like you said. But then I don't think they should allow anybody to really revere or say our beloved President Oaks, because he's not the prophet yet. So there has to be just that, confidence in the leadership, the succession. We've got this. But I don't see that they'll probably be. But then again, there's Oaks's personality, right? Where he's been waiting a long time for that. So that's why it's going to be very telling. Even how they sit, even how they interact with each other, there's just so many signals to it's like the Game of Thrones. I'm telling you, there's all this intrigue.
And it's problematic because that does suggest some form of jostling for position, which is concerning. A couple of weeks ago when I was in Missouri, we heard Stacey Cram, who's the prophet president of the Community of Christ, and she's young, she's dynamic, she's talking about issues that are important to the world and the states and to women in general, right? So it just was such a breath of fresh air. And she has a black counselor. She has a woman counselor in the first presidency, right. And then they have a whole apostleship, including a black woman apostle. So the idea that the ways that we have come to this particular space in the LDS Church didn't have to be the way that it worked, and it's really some of that has to be because of ego, which, as you rightly put down with Matt Harris's new book with Hubie Brown, the idea that some of these were identified as problems really early on, but baked into the process because people felt entitled to this particular position because they had been called at various young ages. And we see that right back to Brigham Young, where he ordained few of his sons as one as young as 11 to be an apostle, so that he would have a legacy in the quorum of the 12. And
nepotism.
That and most of those first presidents of the church did that. Brigham Young ordained 3 of his children to be apostles. John Taylor ordained one of his children to be an apostle, who then got excommunicated. Woodruff ordained one of his children to be an apostle, and he died early. And Joseph F. Smith ordained one of his children to be an apostle, and he's the only one who's Joseph Fielding, who ended up being an apostle. But they ordained them young. They put them into the quorum so that they would have legacies going forward, which suggests this was about their own family prominence, not about what was going to be the best for the church. And so that's concerning, and also something that we really need to take accountability for and address in a meaningful way. And gosh, if only somebody would take the leadership on that.
Yeah, the
be good.
nepotism. There's also a story that I learned from Matt Harris. Oh my gosh, he's got this scoop. President Benson wanted his son to be an apostle, right? And he was campaigning for this, right? And they were super right wing, Bircher, all of that.
Yeah.
Dallin Oaks was a new apostle when this was going on. He was like the newest called. Who was he called with? I can't remember at the very same time.
He was called with Nelson.
With Nelson,
so Nelson,
that's right.
Nelson
That's right.
on the same day.
That's right. That's right.
Because
I can't believe I blanked on that. Yeah. So anyway, older, Oaks said, as the newest barely called, I'll quit if he's an apostle. And that put the church's feet to the fire, because you can't have somebody that you just called as an apostle saying they're now going to back out. So it's a fascinating story. And they had, nobody else, especially Kimball, they did not want anything to do with, President Benson's son and all of that, everything he would bring. But yeah, isn't that a strange story?
I have never heard that story before. So that's a fascinating one.
Gosh, fascinating one.
That does make me very excited about Matt Harris's new book.
Yeah. No, for sure. He definitely has. He's got the receipts. Let's say that for sure. So I had put together like a list of things that I thought might happen or should happen or could happen, but I don't even know anymore. So I'm just going to read this list, and we don't have to talk about everyone, just general things that I don't know if these are even important now or would even be addressed given everything else, but they're things that you always think each conference. And I will preface it with saying that on Faithful social media, people have been reporting that at conferences and times where leaders over the last couple of months have visited wards, they've been hearing things like there's going to be some big news. Of course, we always hear that, right? But they've also added to that, not only big news, but it's something that might be a little strange to hear or a little difficult to hear or something we have to prepare to hear. So the more reports of that I heard, I thought, okay, is it the proclamation? Because that would be hard to hear for some people. It's a very polarizing document. And so I don't know if it means that. I don't know what it would mean. And I also don't know if now that's off the table because of all this other stuff. And like you said, status quo should be the flavor of the day. We don't need to make any radical changes or anything. But so just based on that information, I had written down a few things, but again, these all might be moot. And I know you kind of have a list too, but canonize the proclamation. That was one of my first questions. Another one I wrote down is, are they going to call the Book of Mormon just another testament of Jesus Christ? That's another thing I'd kind of heard out there. Are they going to cut out Book of Mormon? All this seems like window dressing now compared to what's really happening, but these are things possibly, is this when they're going to shorten the name of the church to the Church of Jesus Christ? We've heard that too. They're going to drop the Latter-day Saints. The apostle, that was another question I wondered about. We already talked about that. I've seen a lot of influencers on the faithful side sharing information on why there's no reason girls can't pass the sacrament. This is on the faithful side. And they have said there's a difference between administering and passing. They can administer. That's a priesthood function. But passing, anyone can do it. So that was one of my guesses. Again, before all this other stuff, I wonder if they're going to make a change like that, to include women. Not only can they pass out towels, but they can pass the sacrament. That was one of my guesses. Again, we always think something huge is going to happen, but who knows? I also wrote down a change in tithing somehow. I know that the church is getting hammered a lot over tithing in Africa. It's a really bad look, really bad. And some of the people I've talked to have said, yeah, could there be a change? They changed garments right away for Africa, right? Changed it completely. Could there be a tithing change just somehow? That was one of the other things I kind of had been hearing about. I also thought that they might announce the medical school name, President Russell, right? Even more now that he's passed away, the BYU Medical School. Like I said, this is all fluffy window dressing now compared to everything that's happened, but this was my list. A change to missions. Now, this is something because we're learning that the sheer number of young adults could be decreasing because of 2008, mortgage crisis. There are fewer young adults now that are reaching that age of 18. Fewer babies were born. And I've also heard faithful social media influencers talk about, let's make missions more flexible. Maybe you serve for a year. Maybe a young couple can go out. We already now have 40-year-old men being allowed to go out. So will there be a big shakeup in what a mission looks like? simply to counter this, declining numbers, possibly, who knows? Mormonish did an episode on Jesus Land, right? Temple Square. We're headed into that dedication of the temple and that big event in 2027. Will they actually announce the new name, Mountain of the Lord? They already have a stone, a big plaque that has the scripture about the Mountain of the Lord. Could that be something they'd bring up at conference? Again, maybe none of this matters, given what's happening. So it's hard to know, but these were my really excited guesses before this last weekend, right? My other question was, would they play a recording of Nelson? We don't know about that. And another thing I thought we would hear a lot of is, and I've heard a lot of this recently, marry and have children young, like really hitting that, that was something. But now I amend my guesses to say, miracle stories from Michigan, things like that. So I don't know. That was kind of my list, just on the surface, things I'd been hearing about. But again, could be a moot point with the current climate. What do you think? Did you have kind of a list or something you thought they might do? Or
that's a great list, Rebecca. I think
I stay up at night and think about it. No.
Well, the things that when I was thinking about a list of things, it was more a kind of like, these are the things I hope for conference, which I probably think are unrealistic, because I spent a little bit of time last few weeks going to church sites in the States, particularly to Nauvoo and also in Missouri. And one of the things I found really disheartening was that, these sites have become really like Mormon Disneyland. And the idea that you go there and you have your testimony affirmed without really understanding so much nuance and the real challenges of the people on the ground at the time, and the reason I found it so disheartening was that I think we have such a rich history as the church, but where we have done lots of things which aren't great, and we could, if we acknowledge them and repent for them, we could be a beacon of light for the rest of the world, certainly for the rest of the United States, because part of my trip, I saw lots of divisions, lots of political divisions, lots of people concerned about the current state of affairs. And there are some things that we could really be great leaders on. One of them is that, particularly in the wake of, you were talking about the Nauvoo Legion and the idea that, this is a terrible thought to me, but we did, or Joseph employed a military response to concerns about Mormons that actually made things worse. And then Brigham Young took that military response, took it to Utah, and enacted that on the Native Americans, and to some degree wiped them completely out. So these are really things that I think we should take account of and repent of. And funnily enough, we could actually talk about some really useful ways that we can engage in the world. And we have precedent for them in our unique scripture. Things like the anti-Nephi Lehis in the book of Alma, that these people saw how bad things were and their contribution to how bad things were, that they buried their weapons of war, that they would be willing to sacrifice their own life so that peace could be enacted. Now, if we could have that kind of faith, if we could use that story of passive example to others, we could calm things down. We could be the kinds of people that would be favored of the Lord, highly favored of the Lord, as Alma 27 says. And those are ways that Mormons could turn up in the world and be an incredible force for good. And now I don't know that our church is ready for that kind of a thing. The members could even fathom it. But imagine the kind of leadership that could stand up and say those kinds of things over the pulpit, knowing that they would be unpopular, but that they would be confirmed and by scripture, our own unique scripture that we could live by and inspire other people to de-escalate the current fracture and division that is in the United States and across the world. Those are the things I hope for. I am, maybe I've got 10% confidence that would actually happen. But, why are we playing so small when we have the money to care about people in great numbers, to reduce conflict, to allow for the needs that the actual physical resources of people that would enable them to feel safe and secure and be hopeful about their future? Why aren't we leading in those kinds of ways? And we had this war chest. We have these passages, particularly in the Book of Mormon, that we could be an example, and we could show real leadership in the world, real Christian care, the kind of things that Jesus would do. Jesus, when Peter drew his sword and cut the ear off the Roman soldiers, Jesus healed that ear. These are, Jesus suggested that you sell everything and give it to the poor. These are actual Christian principles that we could be living rather than something else so if we're really going to be the Church of Jesus Christ and exemplify his example, well, then we need to really be leading the world and modeling what is possible rather than playing small and utilize and picking these battles that other Christian churches are picking. And we're only picking them so that we can be in cahoots with them, not because they're the right things to do. We just want to have some kind of Christian currency in the United States instead of leading as disciples of Christ. Anyway, that's my rant over.
Wow. I feel like I'm going to have to cut that out right there and put that out because that's so good. No, it's true. Think big, not small, the things, just the petty othering and the little things that they're so obsessed with. But I don't know. It's a huge time of change. And I know a lot of people are nervous about the new leadership and what that's going to mean. I've seen some post-Mormons say, oh, I think this will probably make more people leave, as they feel othered, or their family members. It's very clear that they're othered, right? And it might have the effect on other people of, just doubling down on a certain way or having their views validated, So, but I would hope that there would be a recognition that, if you're going to lead this kind of global, they keep saying they're a global organization, you can't polarize people like that. But then again, President Oaks is the one that called for more excommunications. Do you remember this? So now he's in the top seat. I mean, is that what's going to happen? Like you said, pettiness, othering just here when you could be doing more than any other organization. I mean, you have central power, one man in charge of all this. Can you imagine what could actually be accomplished? But I don't know. I don't really hold out hope for that. And I just hope people are going to be okay, because I think there's going to be a lot of people with the rhetoric that they're going to hear with Oaks at the top that could be really hurt. And so we all need to look out, I think, and care for each other, right? Yeah. Post-Mormons, Mormons, everybody all together. So
yeah. It's very interesting. Hopefully it's not heartbreaking.
Hopefully it's not. I know, but I think there are a lot of people that are getting their hearts broken. Mm-hmm. I mean, some we know personally, others, we encounter, and then you just get this sense. So, but yeah, it's a weird time. We all feel weird over last weekend. Things are still emerging about it, and about Michigan especially. And, the church's reaction to it has been unusual. So I don't know. We'll have to see what happens. That's all we can say. But thank you for joining me on what turned out to be kind of a little bit of a different, road away the topic. We thought we were just going to bounce around and go, oh my gosh, do you think, no, that is not what happened, because
the weight of the world has pressed down on us and made us be much more philosophical and hopefully effectual too, right?
Yeah. I hope so. So this is going to be Friday is when you guys are all going to be watching this. And so conference will be happening tomorrow. So please, everybody comment. Let us know, what do you think are some of the big issues that are going to be talked about? How do you think they'll handle that subtle transition from our beloved leader, President Nelson, to moving on to, the Keys and the 12 and then President Oaks. And it's just going to be really fascinating. And I'd love to hear what all of you guys think. And then as you watch, even return and comment here, because I'd love to find out. So please like and subscribe to Mormonish Podcast. And if you'd like to be made aware of when new episodes come out, you can hit the notification bell. If you'd like to make a donation to help Mormonish Podcast, we always have links in the show notes to donor box, and we can't express enough how much we appreciate all of you that do. It just means everything to us. And we do have links in the show notes to our Mormonish merch, not iced coffee. You can go get that yourself somewhere else. Now everybody knows my secret favorite drink, right? I know, it's just terrible. So, but thanks so much, Ganesh. You're always like, hey, you want to do a podcast? Sure. He's always just right there, which we really appreciate. One of our absolute favorite guests. So thank you so much for coming on.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been fabulous. So everybody, self-care this weekend, and hopefully we'll see you all on the other side. Thanks again for Mormonish Podcast. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of Mormonish. We really appreciate our listeners and would love to hear from you if you have a story you'd like to share. You can email us at mormonishpodcast@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and on our website, mormonishpodcast.org. And don't forget to look for us on YouTube and like and subscribe. Keep joyful, everybody.